We are on DAF Lamed Gimel Amid Aleph. We're at the two dots. And we are talking about a statement that was made by the Mishnah. The Mishnah had told us that originally, if a husband sent a shaliach with a get, and the husband wanted to be mevatel that shlichus, he wanted to nullify that proxyship, originally he had the option of, instead of just intercepting the shaliach, he could set up a beis din and declare in front of the beis din, I hereby am mevatel the get. But Rabbi Gamliel Hazaken came along and he said, no more. We're not going to allow that. And he said, Mipnei tikun ha'olam. Because of tikun ha'olam, tikun olam, right? Because we need to remedy the world, remedy Jewish society. So, of course, what does that mean? The Gemara is now going to explain what the issues are. So the Gemara's question is, mipnei tikun ha'olam. What tikun olam is there over here? So Rabbi Yochanan Amar mipnei takanas mamzerim. So Rabbi Yochanan says very simply, the woman is not going to know about it, and even though the husband was mevatel the get, she's going to receive a piece of paper that says that she's divorced. On that basis, she's going to get married, and she's going to have a child, and if the husband was mevatel the get, she's still married, and therefore she's having a mamzer. So you don't want that. That's the tikkun olam, to make sure there's no mamzerus. And Reish Lakish Amar mipnei takanas agunos. And Reish Lakish says no. You know, if a husband wants to, after he's already dispatched a get, he wants to be mevatel it, we have to make it difficult for him. And the reason is because we don't want women to be left with so many avenues for the husband to deprive them of a get. And if it's so easy for a husband to nullify a get that he's already written, this is going to create more women who are left hanging. And that's the reason, that's the tikkun olam. So Rabbi Yochanan Amar mipnei takanas mamzerim, Savar la karav Nachman da Amar bifnei shnayim, ubeitrei leslahu kala, vihilo shama, velo yada, ve'azla uminsaba, ve'ika mamzerim. So the Gemara says, let's speak this out. If you recall from yesterday, we had a machlokes between Rav Chisda and Rav Nachman as to the original takana, as to the original accommodation. The original accommodation before Rabbi Gamliel came along was a person could go to beis din and be mevatel the get. And the question is, what is a duly comprised beis din for this purpose? Rav Sheshis had said a duly comprised beis din is a tribunal. And Rav Nachman said a duly comprised beis din is just two people, and that's sufficient. Even though normally a beis din has to be three, sometimes we find that a beis din can be two, and this is one of those cases. So Rabbi Yochanan says, I happen to agree that the original takana is that all you need is two people to go and stand before like Edim and say, I hereby declare the get to be no ois get, not a get anymore. And therein lies the problem. Rabbi Yochanan, according to, if you hold that all you need is two people, well, two peoples, when they gather information, this information may never spread because it's only two people. And if it's only two people and the information never spreads, she may never find out that she's not divorced. And that's how she's going to have a mamzer. But v'reish lakish amar b'pnei takanas agunos, savar lo kerav sheshes amar b'pnei gimel. Ubeitlasa islahu kala, v'shama v'yada, v'lo minsaba, v'takanas agunos hu de'ika. But Reish Lakish holds like Rav Sheshes, who says that when you are mevatel a get, the original accommodation of being mevatel a get in front of beis din requires a beis din of three, a tribunal. And when you have a tribunal, we can fairly assume, that word will spread because chavra isla, saying something beveit lasa in front of three people, there's a fairly good assumption that the news will spread. And that's the difference between two people and three people. Two people can keep a secret. Three people have a much harder time keeping a secret, and eventually the word will get out that the husband was mevatel the get, and therefore you don't have to worry that she's going to enter into a new marriage and have a mamzer, but what you do have to worry about is that a woman will be left hanging on the hook because a husband will have such an easy accommodation to be mevatel a get. Tana Rabbanan. Bitlo mevutal divrei Rebbe. So I just want to frame the Gemara that we're going to see today. In today's Gemara, we're going to be discussing two machlokos between Rebbe and Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. This is the first of the two. So let's bear this in mind, because this is going to be relevant at the end of the DAF. The first machlokas between Rebbe and Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel is, after the takana of Rabbi Gamliel Hazaken, what would be if a husband set up a tribunal in contravention of Rabbi Gamliel Hazaken's takana, and he went ahead and was mevatel the get in front of this tribunal? The question is, b'di'eved, is the get mevutal or not? Does the get become batal? Now we understand that Rabbi Gamliel Hazaken says you're not allowed to do this. The question is, b'di'eved, if you did it, is the get batal or not? So Rebbe says yes, the get is batal. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel Omer, Eino Yachol lo levatlo v'lo lehosif al tanao, sheim kain ma koach based in Yafe. So Rabbi Shimon Gamliel disagrees, and it's very important to pick up on his language. He says a husband does not have a right, even b'di'eved, to be mevatel a get in front of based in, nor does he have even to modify the conditions of the get. If the get that he sent via shaliach has no conditions, and now the husband wants to add conditions in front of a beis din, even that he cannot do. And he says, and you know why? Because she'im kain makoach beis din yafa. Because if you were to permit that b'di'eved, then you've taken the teeth out of beis din's strength. You've deprived beis din of a strength that they should normally be vested with, which is to be able to declare that this husband's attempt to foil the get is null and void. So now the Gemara says, Umi kamidi, the midioraisa batel gita, umi shoma koyach based in yafe, shorinin eishes ish la'alma? Question mark, exclamation point. The Gemara says, I don't understand. This is, according to what you're telling me, this is a legal mechanism of being mevatel a get. Comes along Rabbi Gamliel and he says, because of tikkun olam, we don't want this get, we don't want a husband to do this. And now you're telling me that we're going to go so far because of this tikkun olam concern that we have to fortify the strength of beis din, so that even b'di'eved we're going to say that his bittul is not a bittul. But if midioraisa, this is a valid mechanism of being mevatel a get, we know that midioraisa, it's a mechanism that works. So how can the chachamim, out of a concern of tikkun olam, how can they go ahead and contravene a biblical law that a husband can be mevatel a get? I mean, the husband midioraisa was mevatel the get. The chacham said, we don't like that. It's not a good thing, and we're therefore not going to allow that bittul to take place. How can you do that? So what are you telling me? That midioraisa, she's still a married woman, and the chachamim are going to say, no, you're not? Midioraisa, she's still an eishes ish, and you're going to say, no, she's not an eishes ish, and so how can she remarry based on the chachamim don't have that power to contravene an eishes ish midioraisa?
Why don't they? They have the power to contravene other mitzvot d'oraita, shofar b'Shabbat.
Because but you're comparing apples and oranges. That's an issue of sheva al taisa. The chachamim can say, sit home and don't do anything. Here, they're actually changing a person's personal status.
It's a state of existence.
What?
How about ksuba? Don't they have don't all beis dins own all ksubas?
That's a financial issue. It's a financial issue. Here we're dealing with the biblical isser of eishes ish. They're going to tell this woman, go ahead and get married. It's no problem. Even though the get midioraisa is not a get, go ahead and you can remarry. How can they do that? That's the Gemara's question. How can they say an eishes ish can go ahead and remarry? What?
This could be mevatel. Is that Raisa?
The Gemara says there's no reason why not. A husband wrote the get. Why can't he be mevatel it in front of beis din? So the Gemara says Gemara says yes, beis din has that power. But how does it work? Kol de mekadesh adaitu de rabbanon mekadesh va'afke'inhu rabbanon lekidushin minei. The way it works is, and these are fighting words, right? That anyone who gets married marries with the consent of the chachamim, and therefore, at the very outset of the marriage, you're essentially affirming that if at any point the chachamim are unhappy with this marriage is hereby null and void, retroactively. Retroactively.
Yeah.
And therefore the Chachamim can uproot the entire Kiddushin. So it's true. They don't have the power to say that a get is a get when it's really not a get. But what they do have the power to do is say you were never married in the first place. Now, how does it work? So Rashi doesn't say it over here, but he says it in Yavamas, he says it in other places. If a man is Mekadesh and Isha with kesef, with money, we say Hefker based in Hefker. That based in can say that money that you gave to your wife was not your money. And basically they undo the entire Kiddushin process. And that's how they could be Matir and Eishes Ish. Yes?
According to that, if this happened and he was Mevatel, and then Bezim said no, then now she can go marry a Kohen, because it's no longer because of the get that she is.
It could be Midioraisa. She could. It could be Midioraisa, but she could marry a Kohen. But then the Chachamim might step in and say that Midrabanan she wouldn't be allowed to marry a Kohen because we wouldn't want to cast aspersions on children or whatever it is. So yes, I agree with what you're saying, but it could be that nonetheless Midrabanan she would not be allowed to marry a Kohen because of the appearance of her having been married.
Children would be out of.
You know what Rabbi say? Today is a DAF Yomi, just like any other day. So what we're going to do is we're going to move on. But just realize that the reason why this is so interesting is because it has ramifications even in today's world with things that go on, and it's very, very difficult to just use the DAF and to extrapolate into the real world. Just keep that in mind. That this is not a mechanism that any based in willy-nilly can rely on to undo a marriage. Okay. Now, Amar le Ravina le Ravashi, Tenach de Kaddish bekaspa, Kaddish bevia ma'ika lemeimar. So Ravina says, I don't understand. Okay, I can understand the principle of Hefker based in Hefker when a man is Makadesh and Isha with Kesef. But if a man is Makadesh and Isha with Bia, what control, which is one of the mechanisms of marriage, what control do the Chachamim have over a man's act of Kiddushin through Bia? They can't just sort of declare that there's no money that they can take away from the person. This was a physical act. So the Gemara answers there too, Shavu Rabbanan lebi'ilasu bi'ilas. That yes, they can actually declare that regardless of your declaration that this was an act of marriage, the rabbis say that no, it was not an act of marriage, and your act was an act of lewdness. And therefore there was never a marriage to begin with. Okay? Yeah. Let us go weiter. So, I just want to remind you, we've seen one machlokas so far between Rebbe and Reb Shimon Gamliel, and now we're going to see machlokas number 2. Machlokas number 1 was, if a person countermanded, went ahead and violated Rabbi Gamliel Hazaken's takana that you cannot be mavatel, is it batel or not? Rebbe says it is batel b'di'evid, and Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says it's not batel because we need to give teeth to the Chachamim's enactments. Next, Tanu Rabbanan. Amar le Asara. Kisvu get le ishti yachol levatel zeh shelo bifnei zeh divrei Rebbe. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel Omer eno yachol levatel elazeh bifnei zeh. Now we have machlokas number 2. A man goes over to 10 people and he says, write a get for my wife. Write a get for my wife. So the question now is he able to pull off 2 of those 10 guys and say, you 2 guys, I don't want you to be involved? Can he just pull them into a separate room and say, Reuven and Shimon, I know that you were part of the 10, but I don't want you to be involved. Now, it's important to know that when a person says to 10 people, write a get for my wife, since he didn't say the word kulchem, he didn't say the word all of you, what he means to say is, and we have established this already in GITTEN, is that I just need 3 of you guys out of your 10 to be involved, and you can decide which 3 of you want to be involved. I need 1 guy who's going to be the sofer, and 2 of you are going to be Eidim, and as long as you can do that, we're all good. Okay? But therefore, the question is, what if he picks off 2 of those people out of the 10? They're not necessary for the get. And he says to them, listen, I know that I included you into the 10 guys that could be the people involved in the get, but I'd rather you guys sit this one out. So Rebbe says, he says, Yachol avatel zeh shelo bifnei zeh. It's perfectly fine what the guy did, and once he pulls Reuven and Shimon off the roster, they're excluded. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel Omer Eino Yachol Levatel Ela Zeh Bifnei Zeh. And Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says, no, you don't have permission to do that. If you want to exclude Reuven and Shimon from this group of 10, you have to do it in front of the other 8 people. So now the Gemara says, B'mai kamiflagi. The question is, what is the machlokes here? Be'eda shabat la miktsasa bat la kula kamiflagi. The machlokes here is, what if a group of people who are designated as Eidim, 2 of them are now excluded? Do they have to be, are all of the people now excluded, or is only the 2 excluded? Rebbe Savar, Eidu Shabat la Miktsasa, Lo Bat la Kula, V'i'az li Hanach Kasvi V'yahavi Lichtavu V'leisvu. So Rebbe learns very simply. Just because 2 people out of the 10 were excluded from being Eidim does not disqualify the other 8. And so therefore, if 3 out of those remaining 8 want to go ahead and act as witnesses, they haven't been disqualified, and therefore they can go write the get, deliver it to the woman, and it's a perfectly legal get, because they were designated as witnesses, and they're perfectly legal witnesses. However, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel Savar, Eidos shabat lo miktsasa bat la kula, v'hanach lo yadi, v'azli, v'kasvi, v'yahavi, v'sharu eshes ish la'alma. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel understands it differently. He says, no, if 10 people were designated to be a pool of Eidim, and then you explicitly disqualify 2 of them from being Eidim, you pick them out and say, you guys don't be involved in this, so then the entire group is now disqualified from being Eidim. And according to Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, since the entire group is disqualified, if the other guys didn't hear that Reuven and Shimon were disqualified, they're going to mistakenly think that they are still kosher Eidim on the get. They're going to therefore write the get, they're going to sign the get will then be delivered to Mrs. whoever, and she'll think that she's divorced. The Eidim will think that she's divorced, and in reality she's not divorced, because these Eidim were disqualified from being Eidim on the get. And as a result, terrible things will happen, that a married woman will think that she's divorced, and she'll go ahead and remarry without realizing that it's usher for her. So that's one way of explaining the machlokas between Rebbe and Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. That Rebbe says it's no problem if just because you were designated as part of a pool of Eidim, if 2 of those out of the pool were disqualified, the rest are perfectly qualified to continue acting as Eidim, and let them go ahead. And so what? They'll write a get for the wife, and there's no problem. She'll be legally divorced. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says here is the same concern as Rabbi Gamliel Hazaken's concern. Terrible things are going to happen here, right? This tikkun olam issues over here, right? Because if we disqualify Reuven and Shimon, the other guys are going to be disqualified. No one's going to know it. They're going to think that she can be divorced, and she's going to think she's divorced, and that's what's going to happen. Okay? Now, that's one way of explaining the machlokas. The iba is ema. Now we have a second way of explaining the machlokas. Dekule alma eda shabat lo miktsasa lo bat la kula. Really, according to everybody, even Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, he agrees that just because you disqualify 2 out of the 10 doesn't mean that the other 8 are disqualified from being Eidim. They can still be Eidim, right? B'hacha hainu taimid de Rabbi Shimon Gamliel kesavar milsa de misavda be'ape asara tzricha be asara lemishlafa. It's not that Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says that you cannot do this. He's saying that you may not do this. And there's a difference between cannot and may not. There's a difference between may not and cannot. In other words, the previous explanation is you do not have permission to do this, to disqualify 2 out of the 10, because if you do disqualify 2 out of the 10, then the other 8 are disqualified, and they're not going to know it, and terrible things will happen with the get. The second explanation is you cannot disqualify Reuven and Shimon in the absence of the other 8 people. If you assigned a group of 10 people as Eidim, then if you want to disqualify a subset of that 10, you have to do it in the presence of all of the original people. And if you don't disqualify them in the presence of the other Eidim, then they're not disqualified. And that's what Rabbi Shimon Gamliel means. He's not saying that you don't have permission out of a concern of what destructive thing will happen, is that you can't do it. And technically, you're precluded from being able to disqualify these guys if you pull them off into a separate room.
No matter what you say, they're not disqualified.
No matter what you say, they're not disqualified because your declaration was done in the absence of the other 8 people. Mm-hmm. And therefore, we're not concerned about Rabbi Gamliel's concern over here, according to this explanation. This has nothing to do with that concern, because in reality, these Eidim are just as kosher as all of the other Eidim, and if 3 out of the 10 therefore go ahead and write the woman a get and deliver it, she's divorced. So there's no concern of Rabbi Gamliel here, according to anyone.
Is the number 10 significant?
No, it's just an example. So now the question is Ibayalu. So now the question is, what if we change the case? Kulachem mahu. What if the man says, instead of saying, you guys are Eidim, he says, all you guys are Eidim. Now, we has already established previously in Gittin that when a man says, Kulachem, all of you, what he means to say is that I require all 10 of you to act as signatories on the get. And therefore, if only 9 of you would sign, then the get would be an invalid get. So the question now is, what would be the halacha in this case according to Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel? If the guy would then pull out one or two of the guys and say, please don't sign. Do we say, Taima de Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, Mishum de Kesavar Edus Shebatla Miktsasa Batla Kula, Vahani Kevan de Amr Lahu Kulchem, Lo Matsu Kasvi V'Yahavi. So the question is like this. Do we say, like the first pshat that we had offered, that if a person disqualifies 2 out of the 10 separately, that's a valid disqualification, and not only are they disqualified, but all 10 are disqualified, and Vahani, and therefore these 2 guys that he pulled out, Kevin de Amar Lahu Kulchem, all 10, since he said all of you, Lo Matsu Kasvi V'Yahavi, he says now, therefore, they cannot write the get. Because since he originally stated, I require all 10 of you to sign on it, and now that he's disqualified 2 of the guys, none of them can sign on to the get, and there's no way that this get can be a valid get, right? Is that what we're suggesting? Like Rashi, Mahu, mi asar Rabbi Shimon Gamliel shelo yevatel es echad o es shnaim shelo bifnei chavereihem. Is that what Rabbi Shimon Gamliel is saying? That it's asar to disqualify 1 or 2, because if you do, you've disqualified everyone. Odil matayma de Rabbi Shimon Gamliel mishum de kasavar komilsa de misavda be'ape be'asar etzricha be'asar lemishlafa vehilka chafilu kulchem nami. Or are we saying no? If a guy tries to disqualify Reuven and Shimon, he cannot disqualify them because he pulled them off separately into another room. And therefore they're not disqualified. And therefore the ramification would be is that, let's say Reuven and Shimon blow him off after he says, I declare that you shall not be involved in this get. You are now disqualified. And they say, sorry, we're not listening to you. They go ahead and they write the get, and they all 10 sign the get. Is the get a valid get or not? And like Rashi says, O dilma mishum de kasar v'chulei v'hilkach lav bitulhu legamrei v'chasmi bei afilu hani debatul kamayhu im chavereim v'avila. Can they go ahead now and give her the get? So tashma. So let's now see if we can answer this question. Amar lishnayim tenu get leishti yachol levatel zeh shelo bifnei zeh divrei Rabbi. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel Omer Eno Yachol Levatel Ez Lazeh Bifnei Zeh. So the Brisa says as follows: if a guy goes over to 2 witnesses and he says, "I want you to give a get to my wife," so the halacha is, according to Rabbi, you can disqualify one and just leave the other one intact. And according to Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, and you can do it in the absence of the other guy. In other words, you have Reuven and Shimon standing in front of you. You say, I want the both of you to give a get to my wife. And then a few minutes later, you pull over Reuven and says, Reuven, I don't want you to be involved.
So they're shlichim. Is this the answer?
Well, it's a little bit ambiguous whether they're shlichim or whether they're eidim, right? But the Gemara is making the analogy, even though it sounds like they're more shlichim over here than Eidim, because he's basically got a get in his hand, and he says, "You two guys, take this get and give it to my wife." Okay? So, and it's a good point, Gershon. It's a good observation. So then he pulls over Reuven and says, "Reuven, please, I don't want you to schlep out. Just leave it to Shimon." So the halacha is, according to Rebbe, that's fine. As long as he did it, then only Shimon will take the get and Reuven will stay home. But Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says, no, you're not able to do that. You don't have the authority to do that. Since you appointed them together in unison, if you want to pull one off, you have to do it in the presence of both of them. So the Gemara wants to make the following analogy. So you see that this is just like saying to 10 people, kulachem, all of you should be signatories on the get. And you see that according to Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, you don't have the ability to disqualify just 2 out of the 10 and make the get batal. But in reality, it seems like the Baal doesn't have that power. So it seems more like the second explanation than the first explanation. So Amar Rav Ashi, I be'edei ksiva hachinami, hacha b'mayaskinan be'edei holacha. So this is exactly what Gershon had pointed out. Rav Ashi says, no, not necessarily so. Maybe I'll argue that with edei ksiva, when you appoint people to write the get, to act as signatories and the writers of the get, maybe taka, if you disqualify one, then all of the others that had been designated are disqualified. And that's why it's not a valid get. But what we're talking about over here, where we say that no, the husband doesn't have the ability to pick off one and disqualify him, is because we're talking about shluchim. We're talking about people who have been designated just to transport the get, and therefore that's a whole different realm of halacha. That therefore, if you want to be able to disqualify 2 people that you designated for shlichus, you have to be mevatel. You can't just be mevatel one separately without the other person's knowledge. You have to have them both together. And if you try to disqualify one, the other one, then that disqualification is null and void. Hachanami mistavra, and the Gemara says that's actually indicated from the language of the Brisa. The Ketani Seifa, Amar lazeh bifnei atzmo v'lazeh bifnei atzmo, yachol levatel zeh shelo bifnei zeh. If, however, when you first gave the instructions to the 2 guys, you went over to Reuven and Shimon, but Reuven was in the north part of the city, and Shimon was in the south part of the city. And you went over to Reuven in the morning, and you said, Reuven, I'm going to send you with this get to give it to my wife. And then you went to Shimon in the south, and you said, Shimon, I'm going to send you with this get to divorce my wife. Because you gave them the instructions separately, then you do have the ability to later tell each one of them separately, I'd rather you not do it. So even Rabbi Shimon Gamliel agrees to that. He only holds that if you appointed them together, then you can't disqualify one of them separately. But if you appointed them separately, then you can later disqualify and rescind the shlichus separately. So Iyamart bishlama be'edei holacha shapir. Ela Iyamart be'edei ksiva mi mitzdarfi. Ha'amar mar ein edusa mitzdarefes ad shiyur shneim ke'echad. So the Gemara says, doesn't that prove to us that we're talking about not edei ksiva, but we're talking about edei holacha? We're talking about the guys who are the shluchim on the get, the shlichim, and we're not talking about people who are in charge of writing and signing the get. Because if that were the case, how could you designate witnesses to sign a get separately when neither one knows what the other one is doing? We have a halacha that for edus to work, for 2 people to act as a pair of edim to testify legally, they have to be together when they're witnessing whatever they're witnessing. So therefore, you see very clearly from here that we're not talking about edei ksiva. We're talking about edei mesira, people who are going to act as the proxies to deliver the get. So the Gemara now says, not necessarily so. Maybe that proof that you're trying to bring from the safe is not a proof. Because Dilma Karebi Yoshua ben Karcha Svirale, because there's a machlokes as to whether 2 Edom have to see things and be able to testify that they were together on something. Because Rabbi Hoshua ben Karcha says that if you have two witnesses that witness a murder, let's say, one guy witnesses it from the north part of the stadium, the other guy witnesses it from the south part of the stadium, even if they're not even aware of each other's presence, they can still act as witnesses together to testify. So maybe that this brisa holds like Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha. So you have no proof just from that statement alone that will allow us to adduce what really Rabbi Shimon Gamliel holds. So we're still basically left holding, we're not really clear, back in the case of where a person says to 10 people, all of you, we're not really clear as to how to conclude. Is it that Rabbi Shimon Gamliel holds that a person may not disqualify because he's going to invalidate the get? Or do we hold that he cannot disqualify because he's not allowed to pick off people separately and disqualify them? So, Amar of Shmuel Bar Yehuda, Shamas Mine de Rabbi Abba Tarti, Chada Karebi v'Chada Karabin Shimon ben Gamliel, v'lo Yadana Hey Karebi v'Hei Karabin Shimon Gamliel. Comes along Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda, and he says, my Rabbi Abba taught me these two machlokos between Rabbi and Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. Let's just review the two machlokos. The first machlokos was, if b'di'evid you set up a beis din, and we're mavatal the get, is the get batal or not? Rebbe says yes. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says no, because imkein makoch beis din yafa. You have to give beis din the power. Second machlokas between Rebbe and Shimon Gamliel is that if you said to 10 guys, you guys be in charge of my wife's get, and you pick off 2 separately and you disqualify them from that group, and this is not where you require all 10 as signatories, but it's really where you just said, you guys, you 10 guys. You didn't say all of you, you just said 10. So according to Rebbe, that action is perfectly fine because you're not disqualifying the get in any way. And according to Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, it's not fine. Either because you're disqualifying the get, you're voiding the get, and that's a no-no because of Rabbi Gamliel's concern, or because you don't have the power to disqualify either. So now he told me, in one case we paskin like Rebbe, and in case number 2 we paskin like Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, but I don't know which one was case 1 and which one was case 2. I don't know which one and where he paskin like Rebbe, where he paskin like Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. So Amar of Yosef nech ze'anon. Let's try and figure this out from logic. Dechi asa Ravdimi Amar Maisa va'asa Rebbe kidivrei chachamim. That there was once a Maisa where Rebbe paskined like the chachamim. Now, what is the case of Rebbe paskining like the chachamim? The case is by an almana. An almana is entitled to be fed from the estate of the yisomim. And what if beis din makes an error and sells off the estate for the wrong price? In other words, they take assets from the estate and sell it off in order to be able to get cash, to be able to buy food for the almana, but they misassess, they don't evaluate the estate properly, and they end up making an error. So does the assessment of the Chachamim stand or does it not stand? And the Chachamim said that the Mechron is batal, that it's null and void. So Amar Lefana of Rebbe Prata ben Oshel Rebbe Lazar ben Prata ben Oshel Rebbe Prata Hagadol imkein makoach beis din yafe. So this Rav Prata objected, and he said, how can you take the teeth out of the Chachamim's power? Everyone's going to second guess what the Chachamim say. So therefore you don't have a right to nullify the valuation of the Chachamim. So v'chazer Rebbe ve'asa k'Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. So Rebbe said, you know what, you're right. I'm going to paskin like Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, and we're going to uphold the assessment, the valuation of the Chachamim that they made. Umidaha k'Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, hach k'Rebbe. So let us infer, therefore, that when you're concerned about taking the teeth out of the takanas of the Chachamim, which is what the machlokus was in case 1, so therefore if we paskin like Rabbi Shimon Gamliel in that case, we must paskin like Rebbe in the latter case, which is where if a person goes to 10 people and he nullifies 2 separately, is that nullification valid or not? According to Rebbe, it's fine, the get is still valid, and everything's kosher. So, va'af Rabbi Yoshia demin usha savar hada k'Rebbe v'hada k'Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. And Rabbi Yoshia also said that of these 2 machlokos, one we paskin like Rebbe and one we paskin like Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. The Amar Rabba bar Barchana, Chamisha Sabe Havinan Kamei de Rabbi Yoshia demin Usha. There was once a case Rabbi Bar Chana says, I was sitting with 5 elders in the presence of Rabbi Yoshia of Usha, and Asahahu Gavra Kameh, and a man who was obligated to divorce his wife. Now, why he was obligated, we don't know the details. We just know, and we'll learn. We've learned about this in Ksuvis, and we'll learn about this more. But there are certain circumstances where if a man cannot provide what he needs to as a husband to his wife, we tell him, okay, fine, so you have to divorce your wife. This was one of those cases. The husband was recalcitrant. He didn't want to divorce his wife. And Rabbi Yoshia de Min Usha said, listen, man, you got to divorce your wife. Va'ashkele gita al korche, and Omar lahu zilu atmuru v'kisvula. So he said to the husband, I hereby coerce you. I hereby I'm making you divorce your wife, whatever coercive efforts he placed upon him. And when the husband finally relented, so Rav Yoshia turned to the 2 witnesses and he said, listen, you guys, write the get and then hide. Hide. You know why he told them to hide? He says, hide because in the event that this guy's going to have a change of heart because I've put all the pressure on him and then he's going to change his mind, he won't be able to find you, so he won't be able to be mevatel the get. So the Ital Gedaitich Kerebi, so this shows that we must paskin in that case like Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, because if we were going to paskin like Rabbi, ki mitamru mai havi, just because these 2 guys who were the assigned witnesses on the get would hide, or the shlichim on the get, why would that shouldn't stop the husband from being mevatel the get? He could just as easily go and set up a beis din, take 3 guys, and just declare the get to be batel. But the fact that he told them to hide, and that would be the remedy, shows that we paskin like Rav Shimon Gamliel, that if he's not going to mevatel those shlichim that he assigned to be the shlichim on the get, he can't be mevatel it in beis din. So elishma minak Rav Shimon Gamliel sivir alei. So now the Gemara says, but wait a minute. So you're telling me that the other way he paskins like Rabbi, v'yisal gadaitach idach nami Rav Shimon Gamliel, lamalei itmure livderu ivdure. He says in the other halacha, he certainly can't paskin like Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, because if he paskins like Rav Shimon Gamliel, who says that if you are mevatel 1 of the 10, then you're mevatel all of the 10. That's what, at least the first way we learned of Shimon Gamliel. If you're mevatel even 1 of the 10 guys, then you're mevatel all of them, and the get is invalid. Then why was it okay for him just to say, you guys hide? He should have also said, hide and split up. Because if you hide and he finds you, he says, surprise, I found you. Then as long as he should have said to them, he says, Lama lahu itmur livderu ivdure. You should also split up, because if like Rashi says, shelo yimseim biyachad ve'en yachol levatel zeh shelo bifnei zeh. According to Shimon Gamliel, according to one version of Shimon Gamliel, a guy doesn't have the ability to nullify 1 without the other, to nullify 1 out of the 10 without the other 9, and therefore, according to Shimon Gamliel, he should have said, not only should you hide, but also split up, so that if he does find you, he still won't be able to be mevatel either of you. But the fact that he didn't say that, elishma mina chada kerebi v'chada Rav Shimon ben Gamliel. You see from here that in the issue of b'di'evet, can you violate Rabbi Gamliel Hazaken's psak? You see that he paskins like Rav Shimon Gamliel and says no, because in Kei Makoch based in Yafa, there's tikkun olam concerns, and we have to give power to the beis din. And according to the other issue of can a person pull off 1 of the group and be mevatel the whole group, so according to Rav Shimon Gamliel, you don't have the ability to do that if you just are mevatel 1 of them. But according to Rebbe, you could be mevatel 1, and the other one is still intact. But if there's only 2 guys here, Rabbi Yoshia should have said to both of them, you should have split up, and that way he won't be able to be mevatel 1 without the other, because according to Rebbe, if they're inseparable, because there are only 2 Eidim, he won't be able to do that. According to Shimon Gamliel, you could do that. According to one version of Shimon Gamliel, that you could be mevatel 1, and then that breaks the whole thing. So therefore, he should have. According to Shimon Gamliel, you can't be mevatel 1 without the other, and therefore he should have told him to split up. The fact that he didn't tell him to split up shows that he paskins like Rebbe in that case. But V'Rava Amar Rav Nachman halacha k'Rebbe b'shteihen. But Rava says in the name of Rav Nachman that no, we paskin like Rebbe in both of those machlokos between Rebbe and Shimon Gamliel. That number one, we paskin b'di'eved. If a guy violates Rebbe Gamliel hazaken's takana and sets up his own beis din, he is mevatel the get. And we also hold that if a person wants to be mevatel one of the guys, the other people are still intact. So that's basically what Rebbe holds. As long as you have as long as you have three people that can still write the get, that's perfectly fine. So the Gemara now says, "V'les leila Rav Nachman makoch beis din yafe." So how can you say that? How can Rav Nachman say that we don't give teeth to the beis din's takana, to Rabbi Gamliel hazaken's takana? The ha'amar Rav Nachman amar Shmuel yisomim shabo lachlok b'nichsei avihen. We see an example of where Rav Nachman says we do give koyach to beis din. What's the example? We have yisomim, small children. Father passes away, and they're not capable of making financial decisions on their own about dividing the estate. So what does beis din do? Beis din ma'amidin lahen apotropus uborin lahen chelek yafe. Beis din will set up a separate custodian for each orphan, and that custodian will have only the best interests of his client, of his orphan client at heart. And therefore, this is the most equitable way to do it, because each custodian will fight for the interests of his client, and eventually, therefore, there's a good chance you'll get an equitable division of the estate. Now, higdilu yechonu limchos, but because it was done without their consent, because they're ketanim, once they get older, if one of the orphans, who's now an adult, says, "I'm not happy with the portion my custodian got for me," he can reverse the whole division. But for Rav Nachman, Didei Amar, Higdilu Inyachon Limchos Dim Kein Makoch Beis Din Yafe. But Rav Nachman disagrees. He says, how can you do that? He says, you're going to undo the whole accommodation of the Beis Din. You're taking the teeth out of Beis Din's takanas. So you see that Rav Nachman holds that you have to give power to the Beis Din, right? You have to give strength and fortify the Beis Din and uphold their takanas. So how can he say by the case of Rabbi Gamliel that we paskin like Rebbe and we take out the teeth, that b'di'eved, if a guy said a Beis Din, it's a valid bittul of the get? So the Gemara answers, Hasam amona hacha isura. Very simple distinction, the Gemara says. When it comes to financial issues, Rav Nachman is prepared, even b'di'eved, to uphold the rulings of the Beis Din because of hefker, Beis Din, hefker. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to saying that a get is not batal, and to permit an Eishes Ish to the Shuk, there Rav Nachman is not prepared to say that we're going to go so far as to fortify Beis Din strength at the expense of an Eishes Ish to the Shuk. Even though the Gemara had offered a svara that Hefker Beis Din Hefker, even with the Kesef Kiddushin and Afkinu Rabbanu L'Kiddushin Minei, Rav Nachman doesn't hold of that svara. So that's the distinction. So bottom line is that we have this machlokas, and it's a machlokas whether we paskin like Rabbi Gamliel or Rebbe, as far as whether the Beis Din has the ability to even b'di'eved declare the husband's bittul not a bittul. Have a wonderful day and a good Erev Shabbos.